Every morning Emily rushed through the narrow streets of London, her coat pulled tight against the early chill. The city was waking up, double-decker buses hissing along the asphalt, the smell of fresh bread from nearby bakeries, and the distant hum of the underground. But Emily didn't go to the café for the usual coffee crowd. She slipped inside the small corner cafe near the tube station, nodding politely to the barista who already knew her order by heart, a steaming cup of tea and a warm sandwich. With a small paper bag in hand, she stepped back out into the crisp morning air, weaving her way through commuters who barely noticed the world beyond their own routines. And then she saw him. He was always there, sitting on the same worn wooden bench outside the shopping center, wrapped in an old threadbare coat, shoulders hunched, hair gray and wispy. His eyes rarely met anyone's. Some people passed by and ignored him, others gave a nod or a smile, but mostly the world treated him like he was invisible. Not Emily. She walked straight to the bench, setting the sandwich and cup of tea beside him. Sometimes she would sit down next to him, sharing the silence as people hurried past, faces buried in phones or rushing to appointments. They didn't talk much. Words weren't needed. "Thank you, miss," he would murmur softly, his voice gravelly from years of disuse. That small acknowledgement was enough. For Emily, it was never about recognition or praise. It was about the simple act of caring. Over time she came to know him. Not his past, not his name, not where he had been, but his quiet presence, the subtle shifts in his mood, the small smiles when the tea was just right or the sandwich warm. And so the ritual continued, winter mornings, when fog hung low over the Thames, rainy afternoons when puddles reflected the city lights, bright summer days filled with tourists and street performers. 4 years of tea, sandwiches, and silent companionship. Through everything, Emily's own struggles, long work days, moments of loneliness, she never missed a morning. She didn't know it yet, but these small, unnoticed gestures were quietly stitching something together. A thread of warmth, a lifeline in a city that often seemed too big, too cold, too busy to care. And somewhere on that old wooden bench, a man who had been invisible to the world was slowly remembering that he was not alone. Emily's mornings had become a quiet rhythm, a secret part of her day that no one else knew about. Every day she would cross the same streets, buy the same tea and sandwich, and walk to the same bench where Mr. Thomas waited. To anyone else he might have looked like just another old man in a city full of strangers. But to Emily, he was someone who mattered. It wasn't about the food, that was obvious. She often wondered what had led him to this bench, why he chose this corner of the shopping center over anywhere else. His eyes, though tired, sometimes flickered with a sharpness that reminded her he had a life story she could only guess at. And maybe that was the point. He didn't need her questions. She only needed to show up. Some mornings she would sit beside him, letting the city rush around them like a river. Commuters brushed past, impatient and oblivious, while Emily and Mr. Thomas shared a quiet understanding. She learned small details, the way he wrapped his coat tighter when the wind picked up, the careful way he sipped his tea, the faint smile when she remembered exactly how he liked his sandwich. "Good morning, Emily," he said one day, and for the first time she realized he knew her name. Not because she had told him, but because over time, simply being there had made her familiar. "Morning, Mr. Thomas," she replied, smiling. There was something in these silent interactions that felt sacred, a connection that didn't need explanations, that wasn't defined by words or by history. She didn't pry. She didn't ask about his past or why he was alone, and in return he didn't demand answers. They existed in the same small world, a bench that became their little sanctuary amid the chaos of London life. Over time, Emily noticed more about him. The subtle ways he had adapted to life on the streets. The careful way he counted coins before buying a newspaper. The habit of folding his coat neatly on the bench as though it were a small piece of home. She began to see him, not just as a man who needed help, but as a person who had survived everything the world threw at him. Sometimes she would bring a second sandwich, slipping it into his bag without a word. Other times, she simply watched as he stared at the passers-by, a silent observer of a world that often moved too fast to notice. And every time she felt a warmth she couldn't explain, an unspoken gratitude that passed between them, bridging the gap between two very different lives. One rainy afternoon, as she unfolded her umbrella and tucked the tea into her coat, she realized something. These quiet mornings had become the most important part of her life. Not for recognition, not for reward, but for the simple truth that showing up, consistently without expectation, could mean everything to someone else. And Mr. Thomas, once invisible to the world, was beginning to show signs of life. A slight straightening of his posture, a spark in his eyes, a faint laugh when a street performer's dog ran past the bench. Emily didn't yet know that her small acts of kindness were quietly changing the course of his life. But she would, eventually. And when that time came, nothing would be the same. Emily's mornings at the bench had become a quiet, unshakable rhythm, but life, as it often does, began to intrude. One breezy autumn day, as leaves tumbled across the cobblestones, she ran into Liam. He was the kind of person who seemed to carry sunshine with him, bright smile, easy laugh, and a presence that made the crowded streets feel just a little warmer. They met by chance, bumping into each other outside the café where she always bought tea and sandwiches. A spilled coffee, a flustered apology, and a shared laugh later, they were talking as if they had known each other for years. Liam quickly became a part of her life in a way she hadn't expected. Lunches together, long walks through Hyde Park, evenings at quiet pubs talking about dreams and books. Love, sudden and undeniable, began to fill spaces in her heart she hadn't realized were empty. And yet, no matter how busy her days became, Emily never forgot the bench, never forgot Mr. Thomas. She still carried tea and sandwiches, slipping them to him quietly, smiling as he looked up at her with that faint, knowing look. Liam noticed her routine one morning and asked, "Who's he?" Liam inquired gently, nodding toward the old man on the bench. "That's Mr. Thomas," she said softly, adjusting her scarf. "I've known him for years. I just check in every day. He's not my family. Well, he needs someone, and it's simple, really." Liam smiled, understanding more in her tone than in her words. "Sounds like he's lucky to have you," he said. As their relationship deepened, life became busier. Wedding plans began to occupy Emily's days. Flowers, invitations, seating charts, and tiny arguments over details that felt huge at the time. But through it all, she never let go of her morning ritual. Even in the rush of engagement excitement, she found the time to visit the bench, even if just for a few minutes. One chilly December morning, Emily arrived to find the bench empty. Mr. Thomas wasn't there. Her heart clenched as a brief panic rising. But the next day, a note was tucked under her teacup. "Gone for a little while. Don't worry. Tea." The message, simple as it was, filled her with both relief and curiosity. She realized that while her world was expanding, love, engagement, a future with Liam, the quiet bond she had with Mr. Thomas remained a constant, a thread connecting her past, present, and something she didn't yet understand about the future. Emily began to feel a strange mix of anticipation and anxiety. Something was changing, and she could sense it in the rhythm of her mornings, in the quiet way Mr. Thomas had begun to look at her lately, as if he were holding back a secret. Little did she know the life she had built for herself with love, excitement, and joy was about to intersect with the quiet, steady devotion she had shown Mr. Thomas for years. And when it did, nothing, neither her heart nor her world, would ever be quite the same. The wedding day arrived with a blur of excitement. Emily woke early, her heart racing with anticipation. The air was crisp, the London sky painted with pale streaks of morning light. The hotel ballroom glittered with flowers, candles, and the hum of guests dressed in their finest. It felt like a dream, the kind of day she had imagined only in passing, now made real with Liam by her side. The ceremony was perfect. The vows exchanged, the applause thundered, and Emily felt wrapped in warmth as she looked at the man she loved. The reception followed, laughter spilling through the hall, glasses clinking in celebration. Friends gave speeches, family members embraced her with pride, and Emily felt her heart overflowing. And yet in the middle of all the joy, a quiet thought lingered. Mr. Thomas. She had asked her friend Claire to check on him, to explain she would be away for the wedding, but she hadn't seen him herself in weeks. She wondered if he was all right, if he had found shelter from the winter cold. As the best man lifted his glass for a toast, the ballroom doors swung open. The sudden creak cut through the laughter, silencing the room. Emily turned and froze. There he was, Mr. Thomas. But not the man from the bench, not the frail, hunched figure in a tattered coat. He stood tall, clean-shaven, wearing a crisp suit with a polished walking stick in his hand. His silver hair was neatly combed, his posture strong, and his eyes bright, alive, almost unrecognizable. The guests shifted uncomfortably, whispering. Who was this man? Why was he here? Emily's heart pounded. She rose from her chair, her veil brushing her shoulders, her lips parted in a shock. Mr. Thomas walked slowly, deliberately until he stood before her. He took her hand gently, his touch warm and steady. For a long moment he just looked at her, as though words were too small for what he wanted to say. You don't know who I am, he said finally, his voice carrying through the silent room. But I know who you are. For 4 years, you didn't just give me food. You gave me life. You saved me from loneliness, from disappearing. Gasps rippled through the room. Liam reached for Emily's shoulder, steadying her as tears stung her eyes. Mr. Thomas straightened, his voice stronger now. I wasn't just a man on a bench. Once I was a professor. I had everything, a family, a career, a home. But life has a way of taking, and I lost it all. I lost myself. Until you, Emily. You reminded me that I was still human. The guests were silent, transfixed. Then with a subtle gesture he motioned to a man in a dark suit who stepped forward carrying a leather folder. Mr. Thomas opened it, revealing a stack of documents. He handed them to Emily, his hand trembling just slightly. This, he said softly, is my home, a house by the sea, and a small account in the bank, everything I have left. I want you to have it, not because of pity, not because of obligation, but because you gave me back my dignity, my life. I could not leave this world without thanking you. Emily's breath caught. The papers shook in her hands. Tears blurred her vision as the weight of his words sank in. Around her, guests rose to their feet, some clapping, others openly weeping. Liam pulled her close, his arm firm around her, but his eyes too glistened with tears. The room felt transformed, as if every heart there had been reminded of something simple, something profound. That kindness, even in its smallest forms, could change everything. Emily pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. She had fed a man on a bench. But in truth she had saved more than his life. She had saved his hope. And now he had given her something in return. Something she never expected, something that would forever link their stories together. The weeks after the wedding felt like a dream Emily could barely process. The photographs, the laughter, the toasts, all of it blurred into one memory. Yet what stood out most wasn't the vows or the dancing. It was the moment the ballroom doors opened, and Mr. Thomas, reborn, dignified, walked into her life not as a shadow of the past, but as a man with a gift of gratitude. Emily and Liam decided to take a short trip to the coast soon after. With the documents in hand, they followed the winding roads south until the city gave way to rolling fields and cliffs where the sea stretched endlessly against the horizon. The house stood at the edge of a quiet village, weathered but strong, its windows facing the crashing waves. Emily stood before it, Her breath caught in her chest. She could almost picture Mr. Thomas here in another life, perhaps younger, perhaps happy, perhaps whole. The house wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was a piece of him, the life he had once lived and the hope he had chosen to pass on. Liam wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "He must have loved this place," he said softly. Emily nodded, her eyes damp. "And now, it's ours." Because of him. They walked through the rooms, sunlight spilling across the wooden floors, the scent of salt drifting in through the open windows. It felt like a new chapter, not just for them as husband and wife, but for something larger. An inheritance not of wealth, but of meaning. In the evenings, Emily would sit by the shore, watching the tide roll in. She often thought of Mr. Thomas, imagining him walking along the beach, his mind full of memories and regrets. She thought of the years she had spent on that bench, sharing silence with him, never knowing his full story. And now she understood. Sometimes, you don't need to know everything about someone to change their life. Sometimes kindness itself is enough. One morning, a letter arrived. It was from Mr. Thomas. The handwriting was shaky, but steady enough to read. "Emily, I don't have many years left, but I wanted you to know that the day of your wedding was the day I felt alive again. You reminded me that people can still see each other, not just look, but truly see. This house is yours now, but more importantly, I hope you carry the truth of it with you always. That love in its simplest form saves us. Thank you for saving me. Yours, Thomas." Emily held the letter to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. Liam took her hand, squeezing it gently. They stood together at the edge of the sea, the waves crashing at their feet, the future wide and uncharted before them. It wasn't just a house. It wasn't just a gift. It was proof that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward, reshaping lives in ways no one could predict. For Emily, it was the reminder that love, whether in the form of a marriage, a daily ritual, or a sandwich shared on a cold morning bench, was the force that bound them all. And for Mr. Thomas, it had been enough to turn loneliness into gratitude, despair into dignity, and an ending into a legacy.